Hello and welcome to Straight Talk with me, Sifiso Mahlangu. Today I bring you the Minister of Intelligence, the Minister of State Security, Mr. David Mahlobo. We'll in detail discuss the intelligence report or the not-so-intelligent intelligence report. Among many issues in this country that are affecting the sovereignty of this nation, women are getting killed all over this country, and his budget vote that happened a few days ago. This is Straight Talk. Stay tuned. Minister, I welcome you to the show. One writer said, when the private sector does it, we call it collusion and financial management. When government does it, we call it corruption.
Well, this is the misnomer that we should not actually be able to sugarcoat. Crime is crime, corruption is corruption. These are the issues that even in our own legislation, when there are issues of transigent that are being made, let's not classify them. Let's call a spade a spade. These are the issues that I think that even when they do the reform of the legislation, we'll be able to do so. And also that if certain people do certain crimes, they must be brought through our justice system, unlike others who just go through the legislation that make a provision for a fine. But in certain instances, you don't make a provision for a fine. Let's have a consistency on how our justice system treats same issues with one eye.
Minister, I want to turn your attention to a matter that got you hot under the collar, the intelligence report, what Mr. Pravin Gordhan terms the unintelligent intelligence report. My opening question with this is, did you see the intelligence report that subjected the president's decision to reshuffle his cabinet?
Well, the issue about the so-called intelligence report, we have a problem about how people wanted to create a narrative. Initially, we have an expectation that certain people, they have their own confidential meeting. And people have a tendency to say people were not part of even a meeting. They must speak with confidence and passion and even start to sweat and say, you know what, they know these issues. But even those people who say that they are citing so-called report, they have not been asked to produce the report so that we can entertain it. But as we know now, it's a matter that is subject in the courts, and other people have referred the matter to the Office of the Inspector General to be investigated because there are balance and checks. But we must never, as a nation, for whatever reason that we have, try to undermine our democracy. The president, by our own constitution, has been given the right to hire and fire us. And whatever reasons president has, it has never been allowed. Even in the past where people started to say, why did you remove me? We never even asked the president the question, why do you hire me? Why is it so different this time around?
Is there an intelligence report?
Well, I will not speak about an intelligence report when we have not actually made a reference ourselves to an intelligence report. The president has not made an intelligence report. Those who say they have an intelligence report, let them put it on the table.
I attended the press briefing where the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, raised the document and said, this is the intelligence report that had me fired. This one could have been written by a child. What report was he referring to? Because Mr. Solima Paila says he saw the report and he would go to court to support any notion relating to the intelligence report. So what report did Mr. Pravin Gordhan raise as the intelligence report?
Well, unfortunately, Sifiso, I was not part of the press briefing. My only difficulty is how, as those of us who have a duty to inform and educate society, how if I was part of that press briefing, I would have actually requested a copy of the report. Because if it is being displayed, it means there is a confidence to show the report. Secondly, I would have actually asked a question to say, where did you get the report? This is a difficulty in how these issues that when we want people to start to be accountable. People speak about the report, they don't give a copy of the report. They don't actually even say where they got the particular report. But as government, let's respect the processes that are already underway. The matter is in the courts right now, and the matter is with the Office of the Inspector General. And we should be in a position to be able to allow those particular processes to actually help. But my difficulty is how our media houses actually work. We must be able to hold any leader accountable. They should have requested that report and asked difficult questions, like the questions I get normally asked about the report. But fortunately or unfortunately, I never sat in that confidential meeting. I've not been given the report. Whenever we actually got that report, and it's given to the Inspector General, we should be able to say whether it's an intelligence report or not.
I've spoken to two members of the top six, and they say they have not seen the intelligence report. I'm now seated next to the Minister of Intelligence, who's not citing anything on the intelligence report. If there is an intelligence report, where did Mr. Solima Baila get the report? Where did Mr. Pravin Gordhan get the report? I think I want to understand, Minister, in terms of the legal framework or the cohesive infrastructure of the Department of State Security, who would get hold of an intelligence report?
Well, by law, an intelligence report will always produce an intelligence report for the client, and is governed by certain legislation. There's a National Strategic Intelligence Act. We also have your Information Security Act and all these others. And in the main, you will never find an intelligence report just floating around, because it will have an author, it will have a recipient. And there are even ways that if you actually get an intelligence report, how do you handle that particular intelligence report? But this one is a very funny way, because those people who are citing the reports, they are not making the report available. They are not actually saying that, you know what, this is where we got the report, whether it's so far, and give the institution that have the authority, whether the minister, whether the inspector general or what, so that we can be able to actually deal with those. But we are dealing with a very funny season in the body politics of this country, where people can just throw anything in the air and don't want to take responsibility for the things they throw.
So are you saying that Mr. Pravin Gordhan does not have a copy of the intelligence report that you are perhaps aware of?
Well, I'm not going to say that. I'm saying that whoever says has a report, we have a responsibility to say, make your report available. And say, where is the source of the report? Because if you are going to have bravery and the audacity to come and say you have a report, we have actually taken the nation into confidence. Why don't you conclude the journey of taking the nation into confidence, so that you can don't embroil everybody on issues that are just hearsay or ghost?
The reshuffle caused a stir in this country's political arena. I mean, members of the press went ballistic right after the reshuffle. People believe that the currency responded to the axing of Mr. Pravin Gordhan. Are you aware of any rent-fixing minister, or are you aware of collusion or organizations that manipulated the rand to keep Mr. Pravin Gordhan in office, or downgraded our economy, or played on the rand right after his axing?
Well, if you recall, in South Africa, we have evidence by one of our strongest institutions that is established by law. Remember the institution called the Competitions Commission. There is evidence that in South Africa, there have been attempts to do manipulation of our currency. As we speak, some of the banking institutions, they've come up, they've agreed, they've been fined. What we are saying is that we must never be in a situation where other sectors of our society started to interfere in political affairs. The president, by law, has the right to do what he did. But immediately you have other sectors to try to actually do an overreach into political decisions and create as if there's an uncertainty. All over the world, presidents, they change people. Where have you ever seen the currency actually fluctuating? But this time around, we must be able to say, in our own assessment and understanding, the currency never fluctuated as people had predicted. And even now, this morning, even the small fluctuation that are happening around the percentage is because of other factors that are external to our own situation. Because remember, our currency is actually dollarized, is linked to the US markets. But generally, this time around, whatever people were saying that the rand will actually be going down to the worst levels, it has not happened. At least our economy is resilient, the fundamentals are in place, and the team that the president has put in treasury there, we are very actually excited that you could see, very focused, determined that this difficult situation we need to be able to deal with. We hope the issues of downgrades, which are very serious issues, we will be able to reverse the cycle. And we're hoping that our relationship with the rating agencies will be so cordial all the time. But we are also hoping that there will never be any temptations that they actually get to be hoodwinked into political matters, rather than to deal with the fundamentals that actually determines issues of ratings.
Minister, was there rent fixing just before or after the time of the reshuffle?
Well, this time around, as you could see, the currency remained stable. And remember that even after the reshuffling happened, there was some investment that we got, direct investment into our economy. In other words, the prophets of doom, whether the experts or the opinion makers, they got it wrong this time around. The only thing that had a major hit, which we actually regretted, was the issues of the downgrade, because the downgrade, in terms of our borrowing capacity, our bonds, it can actually hit the poor in the biggest way. That's why, as a nation, we need to move ahead now and focus in rebuilding our country, deal with our challenges. Our challenges, this economy must respond. So that this inequality can continue. A number of young men and women who have the capacity to work, they have the potential, they are unemployed. This is our biggest weakness that is there. Well, then there's issues around the issues of crime that are actually affecting our communities. These are the issues that must actually join us more together, rather than being a nation that is ceased to devour ourselves and say how ugly we look, who this one must be in position, this one is not in position. All of us as individuals, I want to live in a country that one day, if I die, my children will have access to education, will have access to healthcare, they will be able to use their talent. That's what I'm praying for.
Minister, you say that the president has appointed a very strong team in our financial department, in Treasury. Mr. Malusi Kikaba and his advisor, Professor Chris Malikan. There were many prophets of doom, as you say, against Mr. Kikaba's coming into Treasury. Why do you think there was such a strong voice against him entering Treasury? Because he's not the only minister who was reshuffled. Others were axed as well. Why was there such a malignant voice coming from sectors of the economy and sectors of the country against the new finance minister?
Well, we are dealing with a situation where the nation, instead of coming together, and those who have the ability to influence our narrative, we are actually becoming a nation that is actually more judgmental, intolerant. Malusi Kikaba has grown up in the ranks of the organization, one of our brightest and finest young leaders that this ANC has ever produced. He has gone through the ranks, including in government. And when you bring certain people into the system, like the president says, I'm actually reshuffling, giving new blood, giving opportunities, it's the biggest investment. And supported by Deputy Minister Butelis that is there. And the Treasury Department that has always been strong, including the other ministers there. They are a breath of a fresh air into our own executive. But we are a nation that actually wants to judge a book without actually giving them an opportunity. And those of us who will rally behind them, the ANC is rallying behind them, and a number of young people are excited that we are having people that are actually understanding where they come from and the issues that they need to be able to deal with. They are running an important portfolio. Let's give them an opportunity, and our support is not for their interest. It's for the interest of our country. It's for the interest of our continent, because what happens here, it affects our region. It affects our continent, and many people look at us. Rather than to be prophets of gloom and doom all the time, South Africa will give hope, inspiration to many other people that actually look at us. Actually, we're an inspiration to the world. And we must never be able to lose what do we stand for. Sometimes through our own challenges as a country, we forget who we are, where we come from, and what do we stand for in the world. That should be the message. Ultimately, The dream of creating the National Democratic Society is possible. But along the way, the country will be faced by these challenges like we faced the challenges before. And together as people, in terms of our collective action and unit, not conform it, we're able to actually address these adversities.
Minister, the former ministers of finance in this country, Mr. Trevor Manuel studied engineering, Pravin Gordhan studied pharmacy. They didn't have background knowledge of how government runs. They just came out of the struggle, came into the new ANC government. At least you say Mr. Gigaba grew up in the ANC. He's got a background knowledge of how government works, public works, home affairs. But the DA still went to the High Court to reverse President Zuma's decision of firing Mr. Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas. They didn't say anything about the other ministers like Ms. Jumat Peterson, the Minister of Transport, who was also released. They want the decision to appoint Mr. Maliswi Gigaba and the new Deputy Minister of Finance reversed. I think that says something to the African National Congress, doesn't it?
Well, the first thing that we must say that all the ministers the ANC has appointed since 1994, it has chosen the best amongst its best, whether it's Pravin, Comrade Trevor, and others before them. And remember, in the ANC, it's not difficult. The policies are defined by the ANC. You don't go and implement your own policy decision there. And the ANC give you policy. There's a team, there's institution. That's why we work in terms of collective leadership. But when it comes to the opposition in this country, the opposition in this country is very shallow. It has no program. And its programs, its preoccupation is to actually subvert the will of the people. Their job every day, you wake up, the 62% that voted for the ANC, it doesn't matter. Their own preoccupation, just get rid of the ANC. The South African society has an opportunity now. They have shown their true colors. If they were very consistent and honest to say, we wanted to challenge the decision of the president of rationality, why are you selective? Therefore, their motives, they don't no longer need to be defined. Therefore, they're there for everybody to see. The only problem we must always know, those of us in the ANC, the enemy will never rest. They will work every day to actually pit one of us against each other. And that's why President Tambo was correct to say we must be aware of the wage drivers. That will be smiling from ear to ear. That will be doing those things. Immediately, some of these people in the opposition, they wanted to actually present you as different from the other comrades. Our own political development and training says take a step or two backwards and say, what have you done wrong?
Minister, my closing question to you is, how are you responding to the attacks on women in South Africa? There's been several attacks to women across the ages. The 16 days of activism against women and child abuse was implemented. And so we've always been a country that seems to show a lot of violence to women and children. But significantly in the past week or so, there have been many stories circulating. A woman was killed and burnt allegedly by her lover. And we're seeing an episode of killings of our women in this country. Should state security be concerned? Is there a terrorist attack on women? Is there a challenge in protecting South African women in this country? How does state security feel about this?
Well, there are issues about the psyche of our nation. You know, our nation, we come from a brutal system of apartheid. It was very brutal to the extreme. It created a culture here that violence is the way to solve problems. And the advent of democracy, we might not have done enough to be able to heal our nation, to actually imbue us with a new culture and values. Values of tolerance, respect for life, respect for other people, including respect for of diversity for opinions. You could see our protests are very violent. But as a nation, you could see over a long period of time, the violence against each other, whether it's children and women, has increased. And government must be able to do whatever it takes to be able to actually protect the vulnerables. That's why the law enforcement agencies are working so hard, and we are very grateful that certain arrests have been made. And we hope our justice system is going to send a message that crime, violence is not going to pay. But our view is that this is a societal problem. Society needs to stand up. The many people are standing up on other issues. We need to be able to say we are a peace-loving nation. Whatever problems we have, let's resolve them in terms of peace and negotiations. One of the things that we need to be able to notice, for an example, is that in our own families, we can't bring up families in terms of violence. The beating of children, the beating of women all the time. Even certain husbands, they continue to beat women. For an example, you know that we are not working. When we are not working, we are demanding that if a wife brings food, we are saying, where is meat? When you know we have not provided meat, you think that women are a punching bag. We are saying that men who are actually real men, they don't rape. Men must have a responsibility to protect our children. But the other thing that is also coming up is the vulnerability levels. We must be able to take an interest what our children are doing in terms of the social networks. Some of these relationships of people getting into relationship with people they don't know. You start to have a boyfriend, you meet the person for the first time in an area that is not secured. If you are meeting a friend from social network, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, the first meeting you must be able to ensure that you have other people. But then there is this issue around Soweto, which is an organized gangs, because gangsterism is also very high. This gangsterism of raping women, the issues of drugs in our communities. Our biggest fight that we must join our hands, irrespective of our political views, let's fight against gangsterism and crime in our country. And if our people are going to be able to live in peace, they will be able to ensure that there is stability and development. If we don't do that, all the gains over the last 23 years are going to be reversed.
Minister, I thank you for your time. I do also hope that the Helen Suzman Foundation, Freedom Under Law, and Save South Africa will join the fight against women abuse.
Well, the energy they've shown on other matters. I thought by this time they should have shown the energy, but it's not late for them to be part of building a truly national democratic society, because that is the best interest, that we can only coexist if we all agree that irrespective of our own differences, but our goalpost, let's build this society that we can all be proud of, so that their children too and our own children, they can live under this beautiful country, knowing that they too have a future that they can all share.
And that completes part one of my conversation with the Minister of State Security, Mr. David Mahlobo. Join me for part two on Sunday at 7 p.m. only on ANN7.